Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about the Nintendo Switch 2 controller. There have been a variety of different apparent leaks and rumors and credible reports, patents and manufacturing data on the Switch 2 controller, and when looking through it all and trying to sift through what's more credible than not, I think we're starting to get a pretty compelling picture here, and it has me very excited. You see, I'm a big Nintendo fan. I am obsessed with Nintendo. Nintendo is my favorite gaming company. But I'll also admit that I think the PS5 controller is currently the best console controller. I think Nintendo has to step up their game with this next iteration of their controller, and I have faith that they will. I think they'll be putting something together here that will rival the PS5 controller, especially based off all the info we have so far. And so that's what I'd like to talk more about today. But before going forward, let me ask that if you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. So firstly, let me send some credit towards my friend Nintendo Prime. I spoke with them about some of these things beforehand. They recently made a video on a patent that's been discussed over the weekend, so we'll be getting to that shortly, but they also helped me find some information to back up some of the things we'll be discussing throughout this video, so their channel and video will be linked in the description below. But the latest information that's been doing the rounds is this patent that was filed by Hosiden Corporation for a new multi-directional input device with magnetic sensors, essentially a new control stick. Now, this post was discussed, or these patents were discussed by Forward Backward on Family Board, so credit to them. They will be linked in the description below, this thread here. But they talk about how there's going to be accuracy improvement, height reduction, and push-in support for this magnetic input stick. But their big point that they were trying to make here is that while Hosiden is filing this patent, in the past, when we go back to the 2016 period, they filed it in conjunction with Nintendo for these control sticks for what we saw to be the Joy-Cons. So it may be the case that these new patents have to do with a new Joy-Con controller for the Switch 2. And what gets us excited about this is that there's been a lot of talk that Nintendo needs to do something about Joy-Con drift, and if there's some magnetic sensors involved here, it could be something like these Hall effect control sticks we've seen with a lot of third-party devices that are drift-free. So essentially, these patents could be hints towards Nintendo using new Joy-Cons that will not suffer from drift even years down the road. And if this is a case, which again I want to highlight the if part here because we should take this with a grain of salt, not all patents come to fruition, and this technically hasn't been filed by Nintendo but by Hosiden. However, there's a history that seems to suggest that this might be something. But again, if this is the case, I think it's a little bit reassuring because it would be nice to see Nintendo return to form here when it comes to having something that doesn't break down. Nintendo's been known throughout history to have consoles and controllers that are pretty resilient and stand the test of time. But the Joy-Cons, they kind of go against that history. So hopefully there's something to these patents here and we're going to be seeing drift-free Joy-Cons. But the talk of these new Joy-Cons take me back to a report we heard about a few months ago from Vandal, a Spanish publication. So this is what they reported on here. The Switch 2 information comes from accessory makers who have been able to touch Nintendo's new console. The company has reportedly allowed them to put their hands inside of an opaque box so they can understand its dimensions and design without compromising the secrecy that surrounds any new video game hardware. Thanks to that, we know that it will be larger than Switch, although not as big as a Steam Deck. It has also been revealed that Nintendo could have adopted to keep the Switch's Joy-Con, but with a fundamental change in its design. Instead of the rails of the current console, the new Switch 2 controllers would be attached to the screen magnetically. This would make it difficult to fully support the current Joy-Con, although what is said is that the Pro controllers of the current Nintendo Switch would be compatible with the new console. And actually, there was also a MobaPad leak where they just started talking about information where they essentially corroborated the same info from Vandal here, and it was even brought up how the Joy-Cons would be bigger. But what's interesting about this information here is that the latest happenings seem to be supporting this thinking a little bit more. Recently, Nintendo announced this new Joy-Con stand that's coming out alongside Super Mario Party Jamboree. And obviously, this new Joy-Con charging stand is being launched for Super Mario Party Jamboree. That's the main point. But there has been some discussion that perhaps this could also have a little bit of a side benefit of being another peripheral that will be available around the launch of Switch 2 that will give people more options to connect their Switch 1 controllers to the Switch 2. Now, through wireless technology, you can just sync up the Joy-Cons to the Switch, and I would assume you could do the same thing with the Switch 2 by pressing that sync button. However, without the rails that you would be able to slide them into, they might want another way to do it. So this Joy-Con stand that's been announced recently might be supporting this info from both Moped and Vandal that we're going to be having magnetically connecting new Joy-Cons that are bigger, and there will no longer be rails on the console. But the bigger controllers have me very curious here. So Sakurai put out a video a few months ago about how he wants to have faster UI. And essentially he was talking about how he's been campaigning for generations for Nintendo to put in a scroll wheel, or a jog dial it was called in the past, into their new controllers. But he also talks about how Nintendo hasn't done this in part because of size issues, but if the Joy-Cons are bigger controllers, maybe size would no longer be an issue. And perhaps Sakurai is even teasing this possibility as he has teased things in the past. It's possible. Now, Nintendo has patented a scroll wheel in the past. They did so before the launch of the Switch, so it is something they have considered, and maybe they might do it this time. I think if they did, it would be a pretty awesome idea because, as Sakurai talks about, the scroll wheels would really facilitate faster navigation. Imagine playing Tears of the Kingdom where you're scrolling through your bevy of different items, and the scroll wheel will make it that much more intuitive and fast-paced. And these scroll wheels would take the place of the L and R buttons, the shoulder buttons, the smaller ones above ZL and ZR. And they would still be clickable, so they would still function like a normal shoulder button, but they would have that extra functionality. But I noticed something very interesting recently. So, here's Sakurai's video. He posted this on December 1st, 2023. There was a very interesting rumor that came up a while back on 4chan. Here's an archive of it. Hey, not really a leak per se, but something interesting. I work for the TSA at a fairly large airport on the West Coast. A large Pelican case came through the X-ray and got pulled through for screening. And when I asked the guy questions about the case, he asked that he get a private screening for contents. He and a coworker ended up going into another room with me and a supervisor, and they popped the locks on the case. Inside was what looked like a large horizontal computer looking thing. Almost looked like a giant internet modem if I had to describe it. The weird thing is it had a controller with it, and it didn't really look finished, almost like a busted third-party little brother controller, but it had the normal ABXY buttons, triggers, sticks, etc. Only weird thing about it is it had like 2 mouse scroll wheels next to the triggers. After screening the machine and controller, our machine alarmed, so we had to do a check of the guy's personal backpack and pat down, etc. Only reason I'm making a post here is that he had Nintendo business cards stating they were some sort of hardware developer engineers. I forgot the exact title, in research development. I don't know, the actual machine seemed about the size of an Xbox One or so it seems like Nintendo might be out of the portable console business. Who knows if this is actually their next console or what, but it was exciting and I couldn't really keep it to myself. That's all. So this post got a lot of traction, and they did actually go ahead and provide some proof that they did work for the TSA. They provide this image of their badge here. So there's some semblance of credibility being provided here. And what I find interesting about this post is that this was on July 2023. It was months before Sakurai's video about that very same thing, scroll wheel buttons. So it may have been the case that someone was going through with an early dev kit, hence the big modem thing, with the controller, and this TSA agent kind of leaked this information about the Switch 2 controller. Of course, take it with a grain of salt. Maybe this is some TSA agent or someone with a badge of a TSA agent that is just trying to get some giggles out there, it's possible, but I definitely think it's worthy of conversation here, and it seems to be lining up with other things like this Sakurai demand or desire for scroll wheel buttons, which have been patented in the past by Nintendo. But what's also interesting, later in the thread he talks about having 4 different colored buttons on the front, which brings me back to colored button theory. So essentially the idea is that Switch 2, instead of having the normal basic buttons, they're going to have the colored buttons that will be adopting the pattern from the Super Famicom, which Nintendo has used a few times over the years, like with the new Nintendo 3DS. And the evidence we have for this is that throughout most of the Switch generation, not a single game has sported this for the UI. But all of a sudden over the last year or so, several games have sprouted up having this colored button UI. Some of which are Nintendo published games like Super Mario RPG and Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, but then there's other games like Fashion Dreamer and East X. There's a few third-party games doing this, and so it gets us wondering, could it be that some developers have already adopted to start using these colored button format because they're planning to have some sort of cross-gen patch or release once Switch 2 comes out, and we're just seeing some of the early signs here? I think it's possible. That it should also be noted that when it comes to the Mario RPG games, that this could just be a change for the Mario RPGs, but when we see it for the third-party games, it definitely has me wondering here, and with this apparent leak that there was some level of proof provided for that's also lining up with Sakurai's desire to have scroll wheel buttons, it feels like different things are sort of possibly connecting here. Now, something else I would like to bring up is that there was these manufacturing manifests that came out of these different parts, which a lot of people seem to believe are related to the Switch 2. It talks about the T239 chip, which is what we believe to be the Switch 2, or some form of it. And some of this information also talks about there being a built-in microphone. Now, this doesn't guarantee that there will be a built-in microphone on, say, for example, the Pro Controller of the Switch 2, but at least when you're playing in handheld mode, there may be a built-in microphone. And I think this bodes really well because this may be something like what we have for the PS5 controller where there's a built-in microphone, which is good for some level of online play. I personally prefer using a headset, but having the option without a headset is certainly good to have, and maybe this could bode well for the Pro Controller to have a built-in microphone, or at least an audio jack where you can plug in a headset. This is something that I think is very important, especially if Nintendo is going to be trying to push more and more third-party support. From what we've heard from different insiders regarding Switch 2, there are going to be more third-party AAA multi-plats. And if this is going to be the case, you are going to want to have a system that is good for online play if you want to bring in that audience. So having a built-in microphone, being able to use headsets, having an audio jack maybe for the Pro Controller so you can use headsets in that way as well, I think are important things to do. And with that in mind, I'll also suggest that maybe Nintendo should finally go back to having analog triggers. We don't have any current evidence for this, but it's something that I think they should do. Now, I figure they probably don't do this because it's a cost-cutting measure. They figure it's not that important, so don't do it. But I'm thinking that if you want to have proper third-party support, then maybe just make the controllers as on par with competitors as possible, while still also bringing in some of your own evolutions, like hopefully these scroll wheel buttons. Now, the current Switch controllers have something called HD Rumble, which is basically a worse version of the haptic feedback we have on the PS5 controller. I'm optimistic that Nintendo will at least retain HD Rumble and hopefully improve upon it here. But of course, we shall see. Ultimately, what I think we're sort of getting signs for here is a controller, or at least with the Joy-Cons that are bigger, maybe with the scroll wheel buttons, built-in microphone, colored face buttons that attach magnetically to the console. And that all sounds pretty good so far. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.